Greetings all, Sniffleman601 here. Please bear with me, feeling a little bit under the weather today, but of course the show must go on because we have another 2019 Formula One car reveal to talk about. This, the Scuderia Toro Rosso STR14. Little bit of an existential crisis brewing here. This is the 14th Formula One single-seater put out by Toro Rosso. Remember back in 2006, this little Red Bull B team just finding their way in F1. They were running what was effectively the Jaguar R5 from 2004 with a used loaner Cosworth V10 stuck in the back, just trying to get onto the grid really and trying to score points if they could. But here they are, 14 cars later. Toro Rosso, they are a fully mature, very respectable Formula One team, even with a Grand Prix victory to their credit. And this is their 2019 challenger, the STR14. This is a very impressive car, just from the outset. Of course, like many of you, I've been trying to glean as much detail as I can from these launch pictures, and we know that Formula One teams try to hide as much as they possibly can on these initial press photos. But let's see what we can actually glean from these shots here of the STR14. Initially, I have to say, awesome livery on the Toro Rosso once again this year. This car very much reminds me of what we saw in 2017 from this team. The car has a very similar stance, very similar proportions. Of course, we would expect to see that because the regulations from 2017 to 2019 haven't changed all that much. But speaking of new regulations, we do see the 2019 tweaks to the front and rear wings displayed here on the STR14. Speaking of front wings, taking a look at it in this shot, we can't really see too much of the actual aero profile of the wing, but we do have an awesome view of the end fence detail going on here. I meant to draw a circle, I didn't. There it is. End fence detail there going on with that very bright Red Bull branding on the end fence. Thinking about the Haas, as we took a look at a couple of days ago with what they were doing with their wing. What you don't see on this end fence is a little bit of a taper moving outboard. It appears that Toro Rosso have kept this absolutely straight and level, which to me appears to be what the regulations actually intended. And again, I know we speculated a little bit on the Haas video whether or not Haas were going in the right direction or not with their end fence design, but according to STR, this trailing edge is supposed to be dead straight in line with the front axle pointed straight ahead. So we'll see how that starts to develop as we see other cars released here. But Toro Rosso, to the letter of the law and also to the spirit of the regulations, they appear to be following it 100% dead on. No little trickeries going on with that end fence. We do still see the inverted U channel in this section, the lower side of the end fence though, and we'll take a better look at that once we look at some different shots. The other bits of the car though that we can see from this semi-profile shot, it looks pretty standard, pretty conventional in terms of what we're seeing from Formula One cars lately. Everything is pretty quiet across the top side of the front end of the monocoque as well as getting toward the engine cover area. No flick-ups, no modifiers, no nothing, and of course we wouldn't really expect to see anything of that sort on these cars nowadays with the regulations as they are. Everything just has to be smooth coming through the midsection of the car, coming down toward the downwash area underneath the rear wing there. What we can see on this shot, though, is bargeboard detail. These bargeboards are a little bit larger than they were last year, and this is another aerodynamic rule revision that the FIA have pushed through between 2018 and 2019, but we do have larger bargeboards now. Of course, this is designed to try to compensate a little bit for the loss of downforce from the front end, because of course the front wings have been greatly simplified this year, despite being widened somewhat, but the bargeboard's now a bit larger. This also provides room for sponsorship if the teams are so inclined. Toro Rosso obviously not running any branding on these launch spec photos, but we'll see. It is now a very large billboard. But the bargeboards also, they appear to be subdivided into at least 2, perhaps 3 separate panels here. I can't quite tell if I'm seeing shadows or if I'm seeing panel gaps, but we have 1, 2 gaps, which means that we have 1, 2, 3 elements there on the barge board. So interesting to see. Again, we need some better shots of that. Could be a reflection, but we are seeing them play with the barge boards here. It's a little bit more complex than what we saw on the Haas. Then again, we couldn't get this angle on the Haas, and of course it was black on black. But with this brighter shot, looking at the car from a little bit better of an angle, we can definitely see some nice bargeboard detail. In the same vein, we have turning vanes. You see what I did there? Yep, that was clever. You can say so in the comments. But there is our turning vane, and there is the name of Mitch Albon, a newcomer to Formula One, racing under a Thai license. Yes, a Thai driver in Formula One. Interesting. Very cool to see, and of course we wish him the best of luck. But we have got turning vanes here, not that complicated in terms of what we've seen on other cars in previous years, namely the Ferrari, the Red Bull, and the Mercedes. We just have a single element sticking out here in the airstream on the edge of the side pod. It is secured to the side pod via some sort of a buttress, most likely coming in from this angle, but it's mostly obscured in this view. Also, behind that, you can see radiator inlets, and I don't want to be premature with this, but I'm just drawing out a little bit of a profile here. It appears, at least from this angle, it appears that Toro Rosso have subdivided their radiator inlet from this angle. And again, we'll have to take a better look at this in other shots, but there appear to be two distinct openings in the side pods. And again, we'll have to take a better look at that. But interesting geometries going on here. This little element here, difficult to see, appears to be the primary support strut for that turning vane. Also from this shot, profile of the floor. It has that upturn and inboard turn that we have seen on the Haas, and I'm led to believe other cars for 2019, and we've been seeing that geometry since 2017, really, par for the course. Also, heading toward the three-quarter area on the floor, we see these striations, these gills cut there into the reference plane. Again, this is something we've been seeing on many cars since 2017. Very cool to see. Speaking of the rear end of the car, this is what we're looking at. That is the upright, that is a wishbone, and that is a wishbone. Pull rod, rear suspension, confirmed on the STR. We speculated about this on the Haas. We couldn't see the suspension detail on the Haas, but that is a double wishbone pull rod suspension on the rear. So the first confirmed 2019 car to have pull rod rear suspension. And again, I'm expecting all of the cars to have push rod front suspension and pull rod rear suspension, continuing the trend that we have seen since 2017. Finally, on this shot, we have got our rear wing detail right in here. This is the 2019 spec wing. You can see that the flap profile is a bit deeper and a little bit harsher as we go up toward the top section of the wing there, where a little gurney flap may or may not be. Here's your DRS actuation pod right there, and of course the support strut, as well as the fairing holding all of your hydraulic lines going up to actuate the DRS flap, which will open up about 20 mil more than it did in 2018. So very good to see. Also on this shot, despite it being from an interesting angle, trying to see details on the rear of the car, look here, exhaust. What are Honda doing with their engine? Well, we've got a central exhaust, and then we have one visible, but there'll be another on the other side. We've got the central turbine exhaust, and we have got two wastegate outlet pipes, one on each side of the primary engine exhaust there. So we're still doing that triple pattern in a line, just like we've been seeing on the Honda engines, both on McLaren and on Toro Rosso through 2015 to 2018. And now, of course, the big brother, the Red Bull cars, running the Honda engines as well. I would definitely expect to see a similar exhaust treatment on the Red Bull due to that. And here on this next shot, a profile view of the car. First off, a correction. Mr. Albon there. His name is actually Alexander, not Mitch. Mitch Albom with an M is some sort of American Hollywood guy who I don't really know anything about, but his name flew out of my mouth. Alexander Albon is the Thai racing driver who will be driving this Toro Rosso this year. Anyway, from this profile shot, we can see a little bit better of an angle now on the barge boards. You can see we do have distinct elements here. 1, 2, and 3. Clear as you like. Very nice. And we can also see some additional detail here on the leading edge of the floor in the tongue T-tray area, replete with this vertical stay. Just adding a little bit of torsional rigidity as the car bottoms. You don't want that flexing too much. In fact, you can't have it flex too much because you would fall afoul of the ever-present FIA police. Anyway, what else can we see on this shot? Well, you can see, again, that floor detail as we mentioned. Here's the reference plane on the car running at about this height. And also note the angle of that. We do have quite a substantial amount of rake on the car, drawing from the reference plane down on the rear, and then on the front, there's your difference in ride height. Pretty substantial. Of course, pretty much all the Formula One teams running a lot of rake these days, and we've seen this really since 2014 and even before that. Additionally, on this shot, I want to highlight just the absolutely beautiful geometries of the engine cover in the midsection of the car. Have a look at how everything very nicely flows across the top and lateral surfaces of this car. It is so very, very pretty to see. And very clearly, you can see how they are trying to send that air in two directions. One, basically straight and level across to the rear wing like so, but in addition to that, they want to have the air sculpting itself around the side pod and then feeding the top side of the diffuser this way. So we have got two ways to entrain or entrap that airflow from above and below. Absolutely beautiful attention to detail from Toro Rosso from this perspective. Additionally, on this shot, we can see the rear wing end fences here. Yes, the rear wing a little bit higher and, of course, a little bit deeper longitudinally than it was last year, but you can also see just how severe they have made this crease section in the end fence, roughly in this area of the end fence. Very, very cool to see that. No expenses spared in their carbon fabrication department. In addition to that, we also have these little ducts, these little vents cut into the end fence here, in addition to the now typical striations that we are seeing in this area of the wing. Very, very nice attention to detail here. And again, they're just trying to control airflow volume as it goes through that downwash section underneath the rear wing main plane. They're just trying to make sure that they can keep things as effective and efficient as possible. They don't want the wing to be stalling at any point, so in the event of an overpressure, the air can just sort of bleed out of these little slot gaps here. Very, very nice to see that detail there. Toro Rosso definitely paying attention to their work, and hopefully it's going to pay dividends for them this year. Also, just caught sight of this little detail here on the nose. Little Italian flag detail. Very nice to see them paying homage to their home base in Faenza, Italy. And on this next shot, similar angle to the one previous, but now a more rearward three-quarter view of the car. We can see many of the same details on this shot as we could see on the previous one, but we can also get a little bit better of a view now of the rear zone on this car highlighted in red. We can see some diffuser detail. Here are the vertical strakes coming down from topside toward the ground. These are your strakes that divide the flow out of the diffuser. Very cool to see. We also have our rear crash structure here, unlike what we didn't see on the Haas. No rear crash structure, no rear zone at all on those pictures, which was rather odd. But here, definitely this confirms that we are in fact looking at the real car. It is physically sitting in front of the camera for these pictures. It is all complete and put together. Very nice to see that. Get a little bit better of an angle now on the rear wing end fences. They are following that same generic profile that all of the rear wing end fences have been really following since 2017, when they had to have that raked back profile here. Again, implemented very nicely by Toro Rosso. Here's that creased section of the end fence once again. Very nice attention to detail as before, and of course here is the opposite side with the opposing view on the left-hand side of the car. Also very nice sponsor graphics. It's a little bit of a retro look, but of course it is in keeping with what Toro Rosso have been doing with their livery since 2017. I like the contrast here on the rear wing as well. You have got the Raging Bull logo for the Red Bull company, of course, on the main plane of the wing on the rear side, and then of course you have this bluish green tint for the branding on the inside face of the wing. Very nice contrast, very nice, very pleasing to the eye to look at. No other real technical details that we can see on this shot that we haven't seen already, but here's our front suspension now. Wishbone, and upright push rod. We have a double wishbone push rod on the front, and as we mentioned before, a double wishbone pull rod on the rear. All of that is now confirmed. And now on this shot, here is where we can really start to play. Looking at the car from straight on, Now we can get the full sense of the proportions and what we're dealing with on this STR. First off, here is the front wing following that delta profile as we've been seeing on all the F1 front wings since 2017. That is mandatory per the regulations, but we can now see truly the extent of the changes to the front wings for 2019. Again, as we mentioned on the Haas, we have no more cascade flick-ups in this area. All of that has been banned per the regulations, and again, we're left with this very smooth, continuously variable profile of that flap element as it's going upward and rearward. Toro Rosso taking the liberties to subdivide those flaps into several elements. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual flap elements on both sides of this front wing. I don't know if the regulations have a number in terms of a maximum amount of elements that you can have on these wings. Even though they're not cascades, you don't have the little ancillary winglets here holding the cascade elements any longer, but I don't know if there are any maximums that they do permit or disallow. But Toro Rosso using this space to subdivide the wing to 5 flap elements, very cool. And I do wonder what their range of adjustment is on every single flap. I would assume that they could adjust the angles independently on all of those flaps if they really wanted to. Additionally, on the wing, we can see inverted U channel on each side of the extreme end fences there. Very nice to see, and I do think that's a design trend that we'll continue to see. And also, very difficult to see just because of the angle on this shot, but we do have 1, 2, 3, 4 little strakes just on the bottom of the wing there. These are also basically those U channels. You could call these little Venturi tunnels if you want. The idea, you're trying to generate areas of low pressure underneath the wing like so. And of course, because of where they are, they're trying to angle those vortices, these areas of low pressure inboard, so that they can start to feed the midsection of the car roughly in this area here. And of course, that's going to interface with the bargeboard detail just so that they can get the air underneath the front wing toward the midsection so it can hit the monocoque and then start to be worked by the midsection of the car, splitting off in a couple different directions to feed the radiators as well as to attach itself to the floor, to the reference plane area, as well as topside to feed the car that way in the rear end. So lots of different ways the air can flow, and it all starts there with the front wing in that area right there. Very cool. The little vortex generators here, the inverted U channels that we talk about, this is having basically the same function as it did last year and in many years prior, just trying to get that flow away from the front tires, just because, again, these big lumps of rubber, oncoming air, just going to spill off in all sorts of different directions and create a lot of needless drag. So try to mitigate that as much as possible. Also, we have a thumbnail nose. Once again, on a Toro Rosso, a thumbnail nose. Had a thumbnail nose on the Haas as well, so we're now 2 for 2 for 2019 Formula 1 cars with thumbnail noses, and I anticipate we're going to see many more of this. Additionally, on this shot, interesting detail going on along the sides of the nose. First off here, on each side, these are the FIA onboard camera mounts, so these are basically homologated mounting positions for onboard cameras. Should the FOM decide to run a camera, they can choose either side there and there. But just forward, and it looks to be a little bit down of that as well, we have these very interesting little winglets. These are almost reminiscent of what we used to see on the rear brake ducts, those little pinwheel type winglets coming off of the brake ducts, but no longer do we have that on the brake ducts, I'm led to believe, but we do now have these on the front wing, which is very interesting to note. This is the first time I've seen anything like this on a Formula 1 car. Again, they're just trying to condition the airflow to get it around the suspension members and then get it toward the midsection of the car. Interesting also on the location of that, Mercedes running a cape in this area starting in 2017 and continued in 2018. Toro Rosso obviously not running anything at all in this area. They've kept it completely empty and open, but interesting to see that little aero detail going on in this section with those little pinwheel type winglets. Very cool. Also on this shot, we can see the brake ducts. They are much larger and much simpler now in 2019. This was another change in the regulations. The teams were using those brake ducts basically to generate areas of low pressure vortices, trying to get a little bit more aero efficiency in that regard. That has been banned. We now have normal, just big boxy brake ducts once again on Formula 1 cars. I actually like this. It's a little bit of a crude solution, but it works very well. It's very effective at cooling the brakes, which is the primary role of a brake duct. The FIA said, well, we don't really like you using them as an aerodynamic device. Technically, they're a movable aerodynamic device, so we're going to clamp down on it, and that is the result. Just big boxes with holes in them. It's a duct. Additionally, on this shot, toward the midsection, here is the support pylon for the turning vanes, as you can see on either side. Very nicely implemented by Toro Rosso. And, interesting to note, look at how narrow all the packaging is on the car on each side. It is incredibly narrow, which means that you have all kinds of space to play with in this section here on the floor. Again, the more space you have on that reference plane, that's more air that you can get funneled toward the rear zone of the car coming in about this point each side. So more rear downforce. It all starts here relatively forward on the car. The less encumbered the air is, the more volume and the more uniform of a flow of air you can get toward that diffuser and get that very important downforce in the rear zone. Very nice detail to see. And of course, with everything being so shrink wrapped on this car, this also says good things for Red Bull, who are just beginning to integrate the Honda engine into their package. Toro Rosso going into the second year with their Honda deal. Obviously, they know the engine now. They know how to deal with it. And of course, Honda have been developing their package all the time. So seeing this shrink-wrapped bodywork on this car, that is a very good sign. It means that Honda, they have moved on from a lot of their reliability concerns with regard to cooling, and they can now start to shrink wrap the cars even more. Again, the bodywork on these cars, it is simply there to smooth the airflow. It does not need to be any larger than it absolutely must be in order to conceal all of the components. There is not a single millimeter of wasted space, both outside or inside any one of these cars. So you can think of the bodywork as just being a shrink-wrapped veneer these days. It is very cool to see. And on this next shot, a little bit lower down now, but we're still looking straight on at the car. There's our front wing once again, and there's a little bit better look at the little channels underneath the flap elements of the wing. Very nice, but no new details are being gleaned from this shot. Just a slightly different angle thereof. Here are your FIA camera mounts once again, at that point each side of the nose. Here's your suspension, wishbone, upright for that double wishbone push rod configuration. Very nice. We can't really see so much into the radiator inlets, but we can see the demarcation between the turning vane structure, which I'm highlighting here in red on this point each side, and then coming in with some yellow. Here is the geometry of the side pod proper. So that leaves us with a little bit of a gap in this area and this area on each side. That means that they can funnel more air around that section of the car. They can steer it. This would be very high pressure air at this point. And again, just get it steering around, attaching itself to the rear bodywork and then going off to feed the diffuser. Very nice to see that detail. Of course, that'd be top side of the diffuser that they're feeding, and also they're thinking of outwash down off of the engine cover through the rear wing and then up and out of the back section of the car there, as you see in the big rooster tails in the wet. That's what's all contributing to that flow. It looks very cogent and cohesive and well put together, and hopefully this car is going to get some good results for Toro Rosso. They could use some better results. They're not doing too badly, but I would love to see these guys properly break into the midfield on a consistent basis. I'd love to see them challenging for podiums on rare occasion as well. Maybe this is the answer, maybe not. It just is the way of the world of Formula One. When a team moves forward, another team moves 2 steps forward. But again, try as they might, this team, they're still out there and they're still doing fairly well, and this looks like a very nicely put together car. Again, we've only seen one other 2019 car so far, so we can't really rate it in terms of where we think it's going to shake out, but it does look very nicely put together. I love the attention to detail on it, and really, I just wish the best for them. This is a very nice looking package. And on this final shot, just a couple more details to play with on this car, particularly the front end. Have a look at what they're doing with the sides of the nose. We mentioned the thumbnail nose already in this section, but just the rears of that, look at what they're doing. We have gills cut into the nose. Here, and here. This is extremely reminiscent of what McLaren did in 2017 and 2018 with the aero treatment on their nose. Interesting to see Toro Rosso doing something very similar. I don't think these are ducts which then feed inside the nose to exhaust someplace out here in an S-duct. There could well be an S-duct on this car. I can't quite see, but there is a raised section of bodywork right here. A little bit of a, could be a NACA duct outlet there, allowing an S-duct to be in this area and just exhaust the air here. But these are ducts which are definitely taking in that air coming around the nose and then feeding it toward the T-tray area in this section of the car. So very cool to see that detail. Again, very similar to a solution that was fielded by McLaren in the last couple of years. So again, the teams are always watching each other very intently, and they are, of course, looking to copy each other whenever they can. So interesting to see that Toro Rosso have developed a solution like that for their nose and really their wing mounting pylons, because here is where the front wing actually mounts to the car, just this little area of carbon in that section. Very interesting to see. I'm always amazed at just how little physical contact there is between the front wing and the nose cone. They're able to concentrate all of those stresses over such a small area of carbon, but you hardly ever see the front wings just outright fail on their own accord. Usually they've got to be hit by something if they're just going to fall off the car. So these are immensely strong bits of carbon composite, and again, remember when they're at speed, when you've got air coming in and just rushing over the car like so, the amount of downforce that is being generated by the front wing alone can be on the order of over 1,000 pounds, usually more than that. So these are immensely strong areas, and all of those stresses, they combine to exert their force on just those two very small areas of contact between the wing and the rest of the car, yet they hold together. So I'm always amazed at the material strengths. Hats off to the engineers who know how to put all of that stuff together, because it is absolutely impressive. Also in this shot, we can definitively see where the wing and nose assembly links up and mounts to the rest of the car, right in about this area here where I've drawn that box-looking thing right there. So all of this forward is the removable section of bodywork, replete with the nose cone and the wing. If they need to do a front wing change in a pit stop, you'll see them remove that whole section of bodywork through this area here. Very cool to see, and also I imagine it's a rather weighty component because, of course, the front crash structure is the nose cone, so that's got to be a fairly massive bit of bodywork. So when they do those wing changes in 5 seconds, the mechanics are exerting quite a bit of physical strength there to maneuver these things into position. I imagine they're very awkward to handle as well, just because of the size and the weight. So very cool to see that design. Of course, all of this area has to be removable and relatively deformable as well for that crash protection there, and everything from here rearward is the monocoque cutting off to about this section here where the fuel tank is. So very cool to see that as well. But for the most part, those are all of the details that we have on the STR14. Again, the 14th Formula One car designed by Toro Rosso. Very nice to see this team fully mature and really getting their act together in terms of car design. We've only taken a look at 2 cars thus far in 2019, the Haas and the Toro Rosso, but I do have to say I like this one visually better than the Haas. I love the livery, and I love the overall look of the car as well. Again, I was fearing that the new wing regulations would be a bit unsightly, making the front wings wider and the rear wings a little bit higher, but it works very nicely. The cars are still visually balanced. I like it a lot, and certainly this very deep blue metallic looking livery definitely complements everything perfectly. So I'll be looking for this car out on track. It's definitely a nice looking one. Until next time, though, I thank you all very much for watching and bearing with me in my somewhat under the weather state, but hopefully you all enjoyed that one. We'll continue to take a look at the new Formula One cars as they become available to us. But until next time, Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very much for watching, and of course we will see you soon.